Hello, opera buddies in and around the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm glad to be back with you. And the opera that we're going to consider today, Ariadne auf Naxos by Richard Strauss. I'm going to make the assumption that for many of you typical opera goers who make your way to the Harrison Opera House, that this is not one of the familiar operas that you know by heart. Now, when we close our season in a few weeks from now with Bizet's Carmen, that's an opera that many of you kind of have in your hip pocket. Many of those musical numbers have crossed over into popular culture with the Toreador song and the Habanera and so forth. Ariadne, maybe not so much. And so I want to kind of give you a roadmap and dispel some preconceptions that you might have about this opera. For instance, I think the very title is problematic. Ariadne auf Naxos. It's German. It's based on mythology. It's going to be 6 hours long, and it's going to be a bunch of sterile gods and goddesses spouting off a bunch of curses on humankind and people gouging their eyes out. And it's going to be dry and academic. Those who really know their Greek mythology know that that's where the good, juicy stuff is, the bloodlust and the vengeance and the sex and the war and so forth. But there's a lot of humanity that just barely passed their high school mythology unit and forgot what they had studied the night before the test 2 weeks later. And we get a little intimidated by the idea of a full-length opera about Greek mythology. Well, let me put that fear to rest. Believe it or not, Ariadne auf Naxos is not of Wagnerian length. From start to finish, it's 2 hours of music. 2 hours of music, 2/3 the length of the Super Bowl that's coming up. I think you can handle that, especially since much of the music is just delicious. Now, the other thing is, don't worry about the Greek mythology. This is a goofy, whimsical comedy. In fact, I'm going to borrow a term from the entertainment industry that you may have seen used in regard to Hollywood films. The term is high concept. Now, what is a high concept project? Well, let's say that you're a screenwriter and you have an idea for a movie, so you meet with some producers at a Hollywood studio and you have a pitch session where you try to pitch them your idea. A high concept idea is one that can be expressed in just a few words, one sentence. You can explain the premise of your story in one sentence, and that premise is so novel and compelling and must-see that everybody greenlights it immediately. And the best example I can think of, well, it wasn't a very good movie, but it's a good example of high concept, was the recent Harrison Ford movie, Cowboys and Aliens. Now that is high concept. All you have to do is hear the title, and you know what that movie's going to be. It's going to be, cowboys, grizzled cowboys on their horses with their 6-shooters who get besieged by aliens in spaceships with lasers. Wow, gotta see that. All right, now what is the high concept aspect of Ariadne auf Naxos? Clowns infiltrating a serious opera. That's it. Does that make you think of the Marx Brothers' Night at the Opera? Me too, actually. In this case, we've got Harlequin, Scaramuccio, Truffaldino, and Brigella, along with their leader, Zerbinetta, making their way into a serious Greek mythological opera, just as we had Harpo and Groucho and Chico and so forth making their way into Il Trovatore of Verdi in the Marx Brothers movie. It also makes me think a little bit of Turandot, where Ping, Pang, and Pong, the 3 comic characters, sort of ran amok in a very serious opera about love and death. So don't worry, it's really a comedy, and it's in 2 parts. So let's look at, first of all, the prologue, which is loosely based on the French classic comedy Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme by Molière, in which in this version of the story, we've got a wealthy man, the richest man in Vienna, whose bank balance is much higher than his level of education or his taste. And he has planned a fantastic evening of entertainment for an A-list guest list of all the wealthiest aristocrats in Vienna. And here's what the evening entails. There's going to be a fabulous banquet. And then there's going to be a new opera, world premiere opera by a rising young composer called Ariadne auf Naxos that will feature the greatest living prima donna and a star tenor. Following that, much to the dismay of the composer and the music master, who is his teacher, there's going to be a light comic, almost a vaudeville show, song and dance by 5 comedians. And following that, there's going to be a fireworks show. Well, the complication is that the whole evening is taking a lot longer than anybody realized. And minutes before the Ariadne opera is to begin, the major domo, who I think of sort of as if you watch Downton Abbey, the major domo corresponds to Carson in that drama. He's the head butler who manages the day-to-day affairs of this fabulous mansion that the wealthy man lives in. The major domo announces that due to a time crunch, the wealthy man has decided that the serious opera and the light musical comedy are to be performed at the same time. If that sounds impossible, then that's what all the performers think too. Well, let's get into the prologue a little bit. This is the backstage preparations for the Ariadne opera that will and the performance of which will comprise the second half of this Richard Strauss opera. And really, what you're going to get in the prologue is a sardonic and cynical and witty and a bit of satire of the politics of the opera world. There are deadly portraits of everybody who hangs around the opera world as we see everybody preparing backstage for the performance that's going to begin imminently. We have the major domo who represents the non-musical portion of the community. He has no appreciation for opera. They're only staging this work to impress their hoity-toity friends, but he's very condescending towards all the musicians, as many non-musical people are towards professionals in the arts world. And to demonstrate this, Richard Strauss makes an interesting choice. I'm going to show you a little bit of dialogue that happens at the top of the show in this prologue. It's dialogue between the music master, the professor who's the guiding light behind the creation of this opera, and the major domo, in which the major domo is rather dismissively rejecting all of the music master's complaints about the nature of the evening and the fact that this vulgar comedy will follow this spiritual masterpiece written by his student. You're familiar with dialogue in an opera. You know that some operettas say, the original version of Carmen, actually, in its opera comique version, had spoken dialogue in between the musical numbers. And you're also familiar that, say, in a Mozart or Rossini opera, you get sung recitative to take the form of the dialogue. Listen to what happens between this interaction between the music master and the major domo.
Und das ausbildungene Honorar wird nebst einer munifizenten Gratifikation durch meine Hand in die ihrige gelangen.
Ich zweifle nicht an der Zahlungsfähigkeit eines steinreichen Mannes.
Für den Sie samt Ihren Eleven Ihre Notenarbeit zu liefern die Auszeichnung hatten. Was dann steht noch zu diensten?
Diese Notenarbeit ist ein ernstes, bedeutendes Werk. Es kann uns nicht gleichgültig sein, in welchem Rahmen dieses dargestellt wird.
Jedennoch bleibt es meinem Gegenherrn.
So you see what's going on there. One of the characters is singing recitative. The other is speaking dialogue. And that was the major domo. The major domo is such a musical Philistine, such an ignoramus about music, that Richard Strauss doesn't even allow him to sing. This points out how out of touch he is with everything artistic and musical. So it is entirely a speaking role, and it points out the gulf between many of the people who support the arts and those who purvey the arts, the lack of understanding between the two parties. And that exists, sadly, to some extent, even in the present day. Now, the star of the prologue is our composer. This is one of those trouser roles. He is a young man. I don't even know if he's 20 years old yet. He is all afire with enthusiasm. He is excited about the world premiere of this, his very first opera. He is in love with life. He's in love with his talent. He's got all the energy and optimism of talented youth. And unfortunately, he finds that nobody really cares. At one point, he says to one of the household staff who's not paying him very much respect, he says the same thing that athletes and rock stars say when they get stopped for a speeding ticket. He says, "Do you know who I am?" He expects the servants to be very impressed with his stature as a composer, and actually, they really don't care. So the poor composer is standing around. He wants to rehearse the violins, but they're eating dinner. He wants to rehearse the prima donna, but she's getting into her makeup, and there's really nothing for him to do, much to his great frustration. So we see him, in this little highlight I'm about to play for you, he is complaining about the fact that he's getting disrespected by everybody around there, and suddenly a melody occurs to him. His muse inspires him. And I'm playing this for you because, number one, I want you to see that there are lovely melodies in this opera. You know, some of you may have heard a bit of Strauss's previous opera, Elektra, written a few years before, which is very harsh listening. It is not terribly tuneful or melodic. It pushes the boundaries of tonality and is extremely dissonant. I want you to relax and realize that Ariadne, because it's a comedy, it has a lot of ear candy in it. And what you're going to hear now is the melody that occurs to the composer. It's his latest inspiration, but this is an example of how opera can show you what is happening in someone's train of thought, even when they don't say it out loud. He's not singing this, he's hearing it in his head, and Strauss allows us to be omniscient and go inside the head of the composer and hear what he hears as he imagines a flute playing a lovely new inspiration. Now, the composer tries to get anyone's attention that he can, but everybody's busy. The comedians are getting into costume. The tenor is irritated about the wig that the wig master has made for him. Nobody has time for the composer. It's a busy time. There's hustle and bustle backstage because this opera is going to begin in just a few minutes. Just a few minutes later, the composer remembers his theme. He's asking anybody in sight for music paper so he can write it down before he forgets it. And I do a bit of composition myself. I know that feeling. You think of a great idea and you're afraid that you're not going to hang on to it. So now we'll hear the composer improvise some nonsense words to the melody just because he wants to sing it out loud so he'll remember it better. So before we heard him imagining it inside his head silently, now here is the young composer giving voice to this gorgeous new melody that he can't wait to write down. Oh, and you were afraid that Richard Strauss was always dissonant and harsh. Now, don't you feel better? You don't have to be afraid of Ariadne auf Naxos. I was reading recently that Queen Elizabeth has stated in an interview that she does not care for dissonant music. So if by any chance, if the Queen is available to come to the Harrison Opera House, I'm sure we could comp her a ticket. And don't worry, Elizabeth, Your Royal Highness, I think you would enjoy this show. Now, I would say to set up the next excerpt for you, to me, the theme of this opera is that of contrasts. It's one contrast after another. For one thing, we've got comedy versus drama, clowns infiltrating Greek mythology. We've got illusion versus reality, the backstage reality of pre-performance busyness versus the illusion of the acting of the opera itself. We've got singing versus speaking with Major Domo and the other characters. We've got also art versus entertainment, art versus commerce. Now, the clowns and those who are involved in the light comedy with music that will follow the opera are very disdainful of the serious pretensions of the opera world. In fact, the dancing master, who is pretty much the stage director and choreography for Zerbinetta and her clowns, is talking to Zerbinetta at one point about, I hope that the opera doesn't put people to sleep because there's not one good melody in it. And, people like a show with a plot they can understand. That's what's so great about you, Zerbinetta. People come to your show, it's as clear as day. They know what they're getting. They know where they are. Nobody wants this stuff that's over their heads. And here, this is where Strauss uses hummable, catchy melody for an ironic purpose. Now, I want you to listen to the little speech of the dancing master as he compares Zerbinetta's act to the opera. And first of all, you will hear a melody that is associated with the comedians in the second half of Ariadne auf Naxos. But then you're also going to hear what sounds like a German folk tune. Well, it could be from Hansel and Gretel. Ya-da-da-da-dum-dum-dum-dum-da. Ya-da-da-da-dum-dum-dum-dum-da. And you, my radio friends, you might really enjoy that moment. You might think, oh, this is great music. Golly, I can't wait to see it. What you need to know is that Strauss is using it to make fun of the dancing master. For Strauss, this is a very provincial melody, which he's using to point out satirically the provincialism of the kind of people who are bored with opera and only want something easy to understand. So here's our dancing master ranting and raving about art versus commerce.
Die ungetreue Zerbinetta und ihre vier Liebhaber, ein heiteres Nachspiel im Tänze, leichte gefällige Melodie wie eine Handlung, klar wie der Tag. Da weiß man, woran man ist, das ist unser Fall. Sagt man sich, da wacht man auf, da ist man bei der Sache. Wenn ihre Karossen sitzen, wissen sie überhaupt nichts mehr. Als da hat sie die unvergleichliche Zerbinetta mit Tanzen sie.
Yeah, so if you're thinking, golly, I didn't know Strauss could write a wonderful tune like that. Listen, he's doing it to make fun of tunes like that. Don't worry, there's a lot of good music ahead in Ariadne auf Naxos. Now, another a theme of contrast is loyalty versus promiscuity, flirtation versus eternal love. Nobody is more devastated than the composer when the major domo makes his fatuous pronouncement that the comedy must be done simultaneous with the serious Greek drama. He's cursing, he's weeping, he's pulling his hair out, you're ruining my masterpiece, and so forth. But then he catches sight of Zerbinetta, who is quite the Broadway star. She would correspond to a Broadway star like, maybe Carol Burnett, a clown who can sing and dance, for those of you who know Carol. And she's also extremely beautiful. And she might be in the gossip columns of the Vienna papers every day because she changes lovers the way we change our wardrobe. And the composer catches sight of her and is quite taken with her. Now, he's trying to explain the plot of his opera to her since she's going to have to appear in it. And he's telling her how Ariadne, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a moment, how Ariadne is the woman who is only capable of loving one man for her entire life. Well, Zerbinetta doesn't think much of this, theory of love. She thinks that men are like buses. If you miss this one, another one will come along in 10 minutes. And there's this contrast of their attitudes about life and love. But one thing is sure, they're kind of attracted to each other. And there is a lovely kind of pause in the madcap antics of the prologue where this young performer and the even younger composer have a little flirtation. Zerbinetta is saying, I sometimes wish that a man would come along to whom I could be loyal for the rest of my life. And he starts cooing sweet nothings to her. And this is where we see how beguiling and charming and wonderful and totally feminine and just desirable Zerbinetta the clown can be. And she's already got this teenage composer wrapped around her little finger. Well, I think any of us might be crushing a little bit on somebody who can sing in as bewitching a fashion as that. Well, now, the composer who is prone to mood swings. He's a little manic depressive. At one moment he's tearing his hair out and saying, "Why was I ever born? The gods are against me." But now a pretty girl has kind of paid attention to him and, winked at him. And so now he's on top of the world. Everything's wonderful. He's glad he's alive. He loves music. He loves being a composer. He loves all his friends. And he sings one of the most glorious creations in all of opera. This is the one number that is often taken out of context and done in recitals by mezzo-sopranos playing this trouser role of the composer. It's known simply as the composer's aria. And this is what it feels like to be young, talented, full of potential, confident, in love with life, in love with yourself, and just optimism erupting out of you like lava. You know. listen, that's pretty good stuff right there. Musik ist ein heilige Kunst. Music is a sacred art. Kind of reminds me of Schubert's Ode to Music as well. Now, I think of Schubert again because I need to play for you the very end of the prologue, in which, once again, we get a mood swing from our young composer. He goes from that mountaintop of joy and love of life, because all of a sudden the clowns come out and start doing silly hijinks which bring back to him the reality of the disaster that is going to be his new opera, contaminated by the cavorting of these clowns. So once again, he is just over the moon with despair and with grief, and he sounds as though it's really the end of the world as this prologue comes to an end. And I want you to listen to the very last two chords of the prologue. Now, this made me again think of Schubert. There are several pieces, works of Schubert. The Unfinished Symphony is one. The Errol King is another, in which you find that very same chord progression that ended the prologue. Chords of doom, chords that are so final in their pronouncement of tragedy and all that is bad that that's what the composer is thinking right now. For instance, here's the end of Schubert's Errol King. You'll hear that same cadence.
In seinen Armen das Kind war tot.
Of doom. And with that, the curtain falls on the prologue. The thing to understand about the prologue, in summation of that portion of our evening, the first hour of this 2-hour little banquet of music and theater, is that basically the prologue is all about theater. If you took away all the music and just had the actors speak the entire libretto, it would work wonderfully. It is a zany comedy. There is satire in the caricatures of opera personalities. We have the temperamental prima donna stamping her foot. We have the tenor who is as dumb as a sack of hair and can't learn his part. All those things that we still make fun of today. It doesn't really need the music, although the music is wonderful. Now, with the Ariadne opera that happens after your intermission, it's quite the opposite. When I first saw this opera at a time when I was not as knowledgeable about opera as I am now, many years ago, I thought, gosh, this is boring. Well, don't worry, it's not boring. The reason I thought it was is that it is as static dramatically as the prologue is manic and busy and full of zany comedy. Basically, you have a woman who is grieving, Ariadne. She has lost her love. She's been abandoned on the island of Naxos by her erstwhile lover, Theseus. That's the German pronunciation. You might have thought it was Theseus. And she realizes that she is possibly on this, alone on this desolate rocky island for the rest of her life. And she lies around and grieves and weeps and sighs and grieves and weeps and sighs. And finally, another god comes along to rescue her. That's Bacchus, the god of revelry. They have a love duet, and the curtain comes down. Not a lot happens. I don't want you to be bored. You should not be bored. I have figured out the key to really enjoying the Ariadne portion of the entire work. You need to forget about the theatrical aspect of it. What you need to do is to realize that it is basically 100% musical interest, that the Ariadne opera by this young composer is one magical musical sequence after another of ravishing, heartbreaking, intoxicatingly beautiful, glorious music from start to finish. But the problem is that the musical numbers that you have, these passages, they are not iconic. They're not famous highlights the way that the Toreador song is, or Un Bel Di, or Celeste Aida, or any of those other chestnuts that you hear all the time on highlight albums or in concerts. You're not familiar with them the way you are with those others. So what you need is a roadmap, and I, Glenn Winters, am going to give it to you. We're going to tiptoe through this and see one at a time what these glorious excerpts are. Now, who is Ariadne? Ariadne is an iconic figure, even if she doesn't have iconic music. As I say, she is abandoned by her lover and believes that she can only love one man for the rest of her life. Now, the theme of this portion is the way that grief can paralyze us and cause us to be unable to move on in life until we have a transformational, or until and unless we encounter a transformational experience. The figure of Ariadne has been the subject of innumerable operas, plays, philosophical poems and essays, ballets, all kinds of artworks, including one of the very first operas, a lost opera by Claudio Monteverdi, the father of modern opera, called Ariadne. All we have remaining from this 1607 version of Ariadne is one aria that you hear frequently. It's called Lasciatemi morire, Ariadne singing Just Let Me Die. Something that Richard Strauss's Ariadne is going to say over and over. So let's hear one of the very first instances of the grieving Ariadne in this little portion of some ancient music by Monteverdi. So Ariadne, for artists and poets and composers of all types, is the embodiment of paralyzing grief. This is a figure that we find in all sorts of under other names. For instance, those of you, and if you're listening to WHRO Classical FM, I'm sure that you watch public broadcasting television as well, and you may be a Downton Abbey fan. It occurs to me that Lady Mary, at the beginning of season 4 earlier this fall, was an Ariadne. Following the death of her husband, Matthew, didn't Lady Mary find herself paralyzed with grief, unable to join in the affairs of the household, and just kind of crying in her beer until she was finally shaken out of it? That's a good example of an Ariadne character. And another example that I just will briefly mention is Jackie Onassis. You know, following the death of her first husband, President Kennedy, she was the professional widow. Her grief, her paralyzing grief, was on television every day as we watched her with her family grimly as the casket came by in the funeral procession and in interviews and so forth. She was the embodiment of life ending because of grief. But then she had her transformational experience, something that our librettist to Ariadne of Naxos, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, called the allomatic transformation, which is when the grieving person is transformed. They are passive and they are acted upon by another who will recreate them into a new creature. So Bacchus in our opera comes along, and through his love and adoration, he transforms Ariadne into a new creature capable of love again. Well, didn't Jackie have that experience with her own Greek god, and he even was a Greek, Aristotle Onassis, and she was transformed from the grieving widow into the jet-set trophy wife of an international billionaire. It's a pretty good analogy for what happens in this operatic portion of Ariadne of Naxos. Now, on to the musical menu of delicious highlights. First of all, we've got us some nymphs. Ariadne thinks that she's alone on the island, and I suppose she is, but you and I, because we are omniscient through Strauss's music, we can see that she has some company. There are 3 invisible spirit goddesses on this island. What are nymphs exactly? Nymphs are the spirits which animate all of nature. Name any aspect of nature: clouds, wind, rain, water, oceans, rivers, streams, lakes, puddles, grass, flowers, trees. All of these aspects of nature are animated, according to the Greek mythology, by spirits that are portrayed as nubile young women. And Ariadne has 3 of these nymphs, which kind of form a Greek chorus, commenting on her, noticing that she does nothing but weep, wondering why she does, and so forth. And it doesn't matter what they're singing. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they're saying. They could be singing the white pages of the Virginia Beach phone book, and it just doesn't matter. Their trios are so intoxicatingly beautiful as these voices, 2 sopranos and a contralto, twine and intertwine and wrap themselves around each other in heavenly harmony, that it is just, it can put you under a spell. Here's a little bit of the opening scene of the opera as the nymphs comment on the eternal weeping of Ariadne. Oh, yeah. Radio friends, I'm going to give you the opposite advice that I would usually give for the appreciation of opera. Usually, I don't like it when people close their eyes and don't watch the super titles, don't watch the words and pay attention to what's happening. Here, go ahead, close your eyes and just wallow in the sheer sonority of these 3 spirit goddesses. As they warble, it's just delicious. It's a concert. It's not really drama the way Falstaff is. Now, Strauss pays homage to several of his Germanic colleague composers who came before him. The figure of the composer is an homage to Mozart. It's a Cherubino-like figure. We had the homage to Schubert in the Ode to Music and in the final chords of the prologue. And here I think the Nymphs trio is a little bit of a recall of the Rhine Maidens at the opening of Das Rheingold, in which you have again spirits, nymphs of the Rhine River warbling in ecstatic beauty. Okay, now what's next on your menu of delicious musical highlights? Well, we need to meet Ariadne. She's going to arise from her catatonic state that she spends much of her time in on that island of Naxos, and she's going to give voice to her sadness and her grief. She's going to uh, sing a famous aria called Ein schönes war. There was a beautiful thing. What was this beautiful thing? She says there was a thing called Theseus Ariadne. She's coming close to inventing a celebrity couple name like Bennifer for Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez that you see in popular literature these days. She says there was a thing called Theseus Ariadne. She should have just called it Ariadne. It would have been, I'm sure it would have occurred to her a little later. So what is Ein schönes war? It is an elegiac, dreamy, nostalgic reflection on lost love, with soaring soprano lines, exquisite pianissimos. Nobody wrote for the soprano voice like Richard Strauss. He knew how to let it do all those spinning, blossoming, soaring, blooming things that we love to hear sopranos do. And this is just as good as it gets. Listen to a little of the beginning. In order for us to empathize with another's grief, that grief must have a certain dignity and nobility. That was certainly the case with Jackie Kennedy. And I think you can see how in that excerpt we just heard, Strauss imbues the vocal lines of Ariadne with this essential dignity, nobility of bearing that allow us to empathize with her. She's not hysterical and over-emotional about it, so that we do have empathy for her. Well, again, she's not alone on the island. Besides our invisible nymphs, we have 5 clowns who, from Ariadne's point of view, are all too visible, though she does her best to totally ignore them, because the prima donna who is portraying Ariadne is still highly miffed that these lowlifes are sharing the stage with her. Well, the clowns are watching her and commenting like a Greek chorus as well, and the chief male clown, Harlequin, written for baritone, decides he's going to try to cheer her up. So he sings a little solo, Lieben, Hassen, Hoffen, Zagen, love, hate, hope, and fear. A light-hearted, dance-like solo. And, one of the nymphs is Echo, the goddess of echo sound effects, and you'll hear her echo the melody that he sings. Here you have something that's not too operatic. It could be from a musical comedy. It's a toe-tapping, catchy little theme.
Hassen, hoffen, sagen, alle Lust und alle Qual, alles kann ein Herz ertragen, einmal das andere
Okay, now those of you who think you only like Puccini, come on, admit it. These are pretty good tunes. These are pretty good melodic lines. And here comes another thrilling passage for Ariadne, which for me is perhaps one of the highlights of this portion of the work. Another aria, Es gibt ein Reich. There is a realm of existence for which she awaits. And what is that realm? It's the realm of death. Ariadne longs for death. She does not dread death. She welcomes it. She embraces it because it will mean the end of her suffering. So don't be confused when she sounds excited and animated in the conclusion of this aria, which is truly a thrilling piece of music. She's not looking forward to her new love. She's looking forward to Hermes, the messenger of death. That is a number that can lift you out of your seat if it's delivered with passion and vocal power. So anticipate that when you come to our performance. This is followed by, Ariadne now stalks off into her cave so she won't have to interact with the comedians, and it's time for them to do some of their shtick. This is what the composer was dreading. But actually, it works out okay. We kind of enjoy it. They sing a madrigal. It has the one tune which, if you leave the theater humming a tune, I bet it's going to be this one. Da-dum, bum, bum, ba-da. Well, let's hear the comedians do it, and then I've got a comparison to make on the other side.
Es gibt noch tanzen, noch singen, Tage von Tränen zu trocknen, ein schönes Auge. Es trocknet Tränen, die schmeichelnde Sonne. Es trocknet Tränen, der Tränen zu trocknen, es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage von Tränen zu trocknen, ein schönes Auge. Es trocknet Tränen, die schmeichelnde Sonne. Es trocknet Tränen, der Rose gibt. Will sie sich spielen, tanzen und singen, gefiele der eine oder der andere, der andere oder der es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage. Es trocknet Tränen der Rose. Es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage. Es trocknet Tränen, die schmeichelnde. Es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage. Es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage. Die Sonne gibt mit Frieden sich allzu sehr den Chor. Es gibt noch tanzen und singen, Tage von Tränen zu trocknen, ein schönes Auge. Es trocknet Tränen, die schmeichelnde Sonne.
Yeah, I think that's the one that you'll find yourself humming as you make your way home from the Harrison Opera House. And it occurred to me, It seemed vaguely familiar. Where had I heard something like that before? All right, now this is a little out there, but do you think there's any possibility that Richard Rodgers, when he was writing Oklahoma, had the comedian's madrigal in mind?
Chicks and ducks and geese better scurry when I take you out in the Surrey. When I take you out in the Surrey with the fringe on top.
I just put it out there. You decide. Now comes the other very, very famous aspect of a vocal highlight from Ariadne auf Naxos, and that is the show-stopping aria for Zerbinetta. Zerbinetta decides to have a heart-to-heart with Ariadne. Look, sweetie, she's basically saying, you have got to move on. I mean, you cannot pine away for a man. Good grief, he's just a man. She reminds us again, Zerbinetta reminds us a little of Despina from Mozart's Così fan tutte, who has a very practical attitude towards affairs of the heart, which is that there's a lot of fish in the sea. And basically, Zerbinetta has got about a 10-minute solo in which she is expressing the idea that there are a lot of fish in the sea, so move on and get over it. And this is quite a number. It is elaborate. It is full of fireworks and pyrotechnical coloratura. And Richard Strauss, you should know, had the stated overt intention to write the most difficult coloratura aria of them all. He wanted to outdo Donizetti, outdo Lucia de Lammermoor's Mad Scene. He wanted to outdo the Queen of the Night from the Magic Flute, which many of you just heard before the holidays from Virginia Opera. He wanted to do the coloratura aria to end all coloratura arias. And there's another musical allusion here. You can tell that he had Donizetti in mind because when Zerbinetta reaches the rondo portion of her aria, there is a theme which could be right out of Lucia de Lammermoor. I'll show you what I mean. Here is one of the tenor arias in the finale, the last scene of Lucia, that is a typical bel canto melodic line. All right, now take that melody and make it a little more upbeat in tempo. Dee-da-dum, dum, da-da-dum, da. And now listen to Zerbinetta's Italianate theme in her big aria. She'll introduce it with a little bit of a cadenza, and then you'll hear her fake Donizetti. All right, some sprightly imitation Donizetti, just so that in case there was any doubt in your mind what he was attempting to do with this character. Now, coloratura, oh yes, all the coloratura you could want. Let's hear just a little portion of this. I'm only giving you just a fragment of this very long and very elaborate aria. You'll enjoy it when you hear the whole thing, and it's a chance to show some great acting and comedic skills as well. But you want some difficult coloratura? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, don't try this at home. Well, there are several sustained high E's above high C and high D's above high C, and you just won't believe it if the audience, if it's even sung acceptably, and I think we'll get better than that at the Harrison Opera House, breaks into an amazing ovation, and you will too. Now, the comedians try again. They're going to do a little bit more shtick, and if you've heard Der Rosenkavalier, the opera immediately preceding Ariadne in the canon of operas by Strauss and von Hofmannsthal, you know that there are quite a number of waltz tunes that people enjoy from Der Rosenkavalier. In fact, quite often, one of the signature items that I hear frequently on WHRO is the suite of waltzes from Rosenkavalier. Well, that's a comedy, and this is a comedy. Comedies appear to have brought out the waltz king side of Strauss's nature, although he was not related to the Johann Strauss family that did Blue Danube and so forth. But you're going to get a wonderful waltz in this latest bit of entertainment from our 5 comedians. That's pretty good stuff. And we're almost at the end of our survey of this glorious concert that is the second half of Ariadne auf Naxos, the part on the island. Back to our nymphs. The nymphs see a ship approaching in the distance after the comedians make their exit. It is, they realize, the god Bacchus, who has just escaped the goddess Circe, who normally does bad things to people, but Bacchus was able to overcome it. Now he's on his way, and they know that this is a good sign for Ariadne. They sing a trio, which, again, it doesn't matter about the words. Ignore the super titles. It just doesn't matter. They could be singing your laundry list. This is sweet, sweet music as they sing Töne, süße Stimme. And that brings us to the end of the opera, which is the love duet. I mentioned that before that Ping Pang and Pong from Turandot reminded me of the comedians in Ariadne. There's another comparison. Both Turandot and Ariadne end with what are intended to be transformational love duets, in which a woman, because of the love of the man who is the right one for her, is transformed into a new creature. Turandot, instead of an icy princess who hates men, becomes a warm, womanly woman who's ready for love. And Ariadne is transformed from the grieving person longing for death into a new creature ready to encounter a new sacred love. In both cases, I'm not sure that the love duet achieved what the composers intended. Of course, Puccini died before he could complete Turandot, so that we'll never know exactly what his transformational duet was to amount to. In the case of Richard Strauss, I think he was in competition with himself. There is so much glorious music, including Zerbinetti's aria, the composer's aria, and Es gibt ein Reich, that I think it was actually difficult for the love duet to exceed those numbers in glorious passion and vocal thrills. However, no worries. It still delivers everything that you could want from a tender and passionate love duet that grows and grows until it reaches a climax. That reminds us a little bit of a Strauss tone poem called Death and Transfiguration. That's what Ariadne believes has happened to her. She believes that she has died and become reborn as a goddess herself. After that duet, Zerbinetta sneaks out on stage and has the last word and says, "Nah, she just got a new boyfriend. That's all it is." So there's that contrast again between the spiritual and the ephemeral in a work of contrast. So folks, don't be afraid of this opera. Don't be afraid of a long German opera. It's 2 hours in length, 2 hours of music. The first half, the prologue, is witty, satiric, zany comedy. It would work almost as a comedy, as a spoken play without the music, except for the glorious composer's aria and a few other choice morsels of lyricism. And then in the second half, I give you license to ignore the words. Just try to keep this road map. Make notes of what the musical highlights are. Anticipate them. And when they come along, recognize, oh, here's Es gibt ein Reich. Oh, here is Zerbinetta's aria. And savor them and relish them. And listen to the fantastic opportunities for glorious Straussian vocalism. And don't miss Ariadne auf Naxos. Thanks for listening. I'll see you at the Opera House.